cartoon in the New Yorker a little while back that showed this table and a woman and a man are sitting at it. They have bright Hawaiian shirts on and with little drinks with umbrellas. And the man is just sort of looking down at his, and his wife is saying to him, "Oh, for heaven's sake, not everything you see or hear is a metaphor." And the title was Preachers on Vacation. The familiar scripture from 1 Corinthians 13. Paul writes, "If I speak in tongues of mortals and of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains but have no love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, it rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. But as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. For we know only in part, and we prophesy only in part. But when the complete comes, the partial will come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then we will see face to face. Now I know only in part. Then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. And now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, and the greatest of these is love. Wedding stories are fun. Usually I don't have to use any names, either because the event was so horrendous that everyone just knows that it had to be Brangelina, or because it really doesn't make any difference who it was. It could very easily have been any one of us. Last week I suggested that just as Robert Fulgham found valuable life lessons and rules and regulations that come out of a kindergarten class, there are life lessons that come out of getting married, wedding days. That is, despite all the things that the prospective brides and grooms tell me about where they grew up, and what they liked, and how they met, or their parents, grandparents, former significant others, former spouses, despite all that, it's how it all resolves on wedding day that usually reveals the web of new relationship. Weddings bring life into sharper focus because I think it's just such a special day. And because of that, we put more into it. And because we put more into it, the truth of our lives, for better or worse, for richer, for poorer, run close to the surface. So there's a lot to take away from a good wedding story, and good wedding stories come with tension, something not quite resolved maybe. Something not quite there yet, still edging into reality. Last week I talked about the tension between a desire for perfection while understanding that wabi-sabi, a slight imperfection, counts more. This comes out as wedding details matter versus details do not matter. Also the tension between the sacred and the ordinary. While everyone should just enjoy the day, nevertheless, the wedding day is very special. This week, just a couple more, and the lessons that go with them. First, story. Jennifer and Justin, October 2004. I met the moms before I met the people actually getting married. I talked with J&J on the phone and confirmed a date for an initial meeting, but the moms, Christine and Rainey, wanted to check the place out anyhow. Susan showed them around when I met them, but they already had notepads full of questions. The next Saturday I met Jennifer and Justin. We met, actually, they had been here as students. What initially impressed me was how incredibly laid back they were. All the more remarkable because of how focused their mothers were. We had our usual discussion, but they seemed to be much more interested in life together than the actual wedding event. But this was about 6 months before wedding day. By 6 weeks out, it was clear that the full extent of the event was beginning to sink in. While moms had taken the early lead and seemed to have things pretty much in hand, the couple was catching up in the excitement department. Whatever the motivation, the closer we got to the day, the more, well, confident everyone got. At least it appeared that way. When I ran into the bride and her mother downtown with only a week to go, none of the occasional tensions between mother and daughter were in evidence at all. They were walking and talking like good friends allied in a common cause. I was thinking world domination. Now sometimes people get the idea that if one spray of flowers on the communion table is pretty, then covering the entire front of the sanctuary with a wall of flowers is much better. While I was busy in the office getting ready, a small army of florists was carting in the decorations. The pew ends had huge corsages with dripping ivy. And the platform, wow. In this case, the bride didn't carry so much a bouquet as a small representation of the floral fireworks she was walking into. Of course she had to work out. The bouquet weighed 20 pounds, I'm sure. I have to say it was spectacular, and something florists dream about and retire on. But there they were. And when the groom, his attendants, and I walked out, well, it's a good thing we were in black because otherwise we would never been noticed. It would have been fine, actually, except for the lilies. I have this thing about a certain kind of white lily. I think it might be one of those stargazer varieties. I don't know for sure, but I can smell one on the other side of the room. It's not that it's a terribly bad smell, but it is one that a particular part of me, the part that likes to breathe, doesn't really like. So the ceremony was a little brisk. I omitted a few paragraphs from the meditation, not because of the heat, although it had been warm, and everyone had a slight sheen of sweat, or glow, as they say. I went short because my nose was running at a furious rate. They thought I was really into the ceremony. My eyes were misty by the time the couple made it up to the platform, and I could barely choke out a "You may kiss the bride" at the end. Afterwards, away from the power of the bower of flowers, people told me how meaningful the ceremony had been. And it was. But it wasn't because of my allergic reaction. It was meaningful because the bride and the groom were smiling all the way through. And that permeated the room even more effectively than 10,000 lilies. And, runny nose aside, I was smiling too. The tension is that on the one hand, money makes a wedding work. Money, it can't itself make a day special, but it can get you the time at the gym, and it can bring sensory confirmation to what the heart already knows. But on the other hand, money doesn't really count, so to speak. It doesn't count because the smiles that light up a whole room, that lit up that whole sanctuary, in spite of the floral overload, can't be bought at any price. And thank heavens for that. Second story, Laura and Mark, August 2008. Usually, the bride is anxious to get to the church. We open up about an hour and a half before the ceremony, and many times the bride and her attendants are waiting to get in. They'll all shuffle back to the bride's room right back here and change into their dresses, check their hair and their makeup, and otherwise putter around. This will go on until we gather them up to move to the back of the church, say maybe 5 or so minutes before the official start. Except once. Twice actually, but the other time was serious weather, doesn't count. One other time, we got here a couple hours ahead. We opened up. No bride waiting. Okay, fine. Then half an hour go by. Still no bride. The groom and the groomsmen were on time. Even allowing for the old tradition that bride and groom don't see each other until the ceremony, we have to ask, hey, any of you guys know where the bride is? Cell phones are whipped out, anxious glances, and then, yes, she's coming, just a little wardrobe malfunction. There's no elaboration. The car with parents and relatives isn't here either, but it arrives with, oh, a good 10 minutes to spare. We shuffle the occupants directly to the narthex because there's some time to do anything else. I'm just about ready to go in and do a little stand-up while we send a search party for the bride. But then her car rolls up. She'll wind up going directly from the limo to the aisle. So we're getting everyone else lined up, and someone says, hey, where's Uncle Max? Who is the father of the bride's half-brother. He was in the limo, someone says, but he's not in the church after a quick search. No, he's still in the limo. He's in the limo, getting a running start on the reception beverages. He has some safely concealed in a shiny, curved flask designed to be concealed in a warm place. I think, just a guess, I think he was, in his own way, trying to get into the spirit of the occasion. While Uncle Max comes walking deliberately down the aisle, the wedding party waited impatiently with maybe an eye roll or two. If they hadn't invited him, the implication was, he'd have come anyhow, and then it would be worse. Uncle Max plops in the front row, probably because that was the easiest place to negotiate. The rest of the aunts and uncles are already seated in the second and third rows, but apparently Uncle Max is special, at least he thinks so. All right then, ready to go. I get to the Pearson room, Susan starts sending people down the aisle, and in spite of the last minute-ness, the bride and her wedding party parade in without a hitch, and everyone is smiling. A little nervous, but smiling. The dress appears functional, even though it was so wide that Dad stepped on it twice walking in. Maybe that was the source of the malfunction. We get up to the platform. The bride's flowers are handed off, and everyone takes a deep breath. Still, I'm about 2% distracted, keeping half an eye on our late arriving uncle. He's very visible, leaning forward in the front row, elbows on his knees. He might be listening, but I know he's staring at a point on the carpet about 4 feet in front of him. He's waiting. I hope he's waiting for it to be over. I also hope he's trying not to throw up. I'm already figuring out in the background here what I'm going to say and do if the big yawn appears. Good thing the autopilot is working for this part of the ceremony. Anyhow, I get to the point where I'm reading 1 Corinthians 13. The couple liked it, so I included it. Some couples, of course, want anything except that passage because it's so popular. But there I am, reading along. And I get to the part that says, love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. In a voice only audible, but clearly audible by the front row and the wedding party, in just the slight pause after love never ends, comes, sometimes it does. The groom hears it. He fights back a smile. I think he's glad it's not his uncle. The bride grits her teeth just a little and vocalizes a kind of, oh Lord, squeak through her smile. But I press on. And I press on because I think Uncle Max is wrong. Sure, people change. Relationships are strained and sometimes they break, but love itself never ends. Ever. Which is why we come back to it again and again and again. The tension. Our lives are governed by chronos, the Greek word for clock time. In chronos, the wedding ceremony started at 3:37 and ended about 4:05. In chronos, time can crawl, especially if you're waiting for Uncle Max to pipe up with a 5-minute testimony to the horrors of marriage, or something else. But kairos is not like that. Kairos is a Greek word that means more like real time, or the time it takes. When two people are getting married, time flies. In one heartbeat, they're two single people hoping everything will go well. In the next, they are married, and there's nothing in heaven or on earth that's going to get in their way. The moment of a marriage ceremony passes incredibly quickly. The love that surrounds and permeates the union of souls, that's forever. That's in kairos. We can't actively live in kairos all the time. Not even poets or prophets can do that. But we shouldn't live only in chronos either. We need to search out those moments when we can take the time to look harder, those thin spots in the spiritual fabric of things, when we remember that there's a whole lot more to this life than we can even dream. Matthew 22, verse 2, Jesus said, "The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding banquet for his son." Last story. Laura and Mark, September 2004. Weddings are planned normally months ahead, sometimes years, but we won't talk to anyone until they're within a year. Sometimes plans change, sometimes people change. But once a reception venue is booked, we'll get a call about the ceremony. I know it sounds like putting the cart before the horse, but it's a matter of economic reality around here. Especially if you have a substantial number of people coming, it tends to be easier to find a willing church after you book a party room. The trouble is, of course, that once the date's set, it's pretty much set. which is how the weather gets taken out of the planning process. I mean, outside of not getting married in deep winter around here, whether your May wedding is warm or cold, think high 80s to low 40s just this last May, well, that's the role of the meteorological dice. So when Laura and Mark made their plans in November 2003, they were just hoping for a pleasant September Saturday. Maybe it was called an Indian summer Saturday, just at the edge of fall with some leaves beginning to yellow would be glorious. What they got, of course,